They don't have the best reputation. They're known for being very brawdy, very loud, drunkards, rough on the laundry, difficult to work with, not the most pleasant women to be around, but usually they are from the very lowest class of people.
So often when we're thinking about the 18th century, we can learn a lot about the material cultures, the things that people are working with in the 18th century, or we can learn about the techniques. But so often what we want to learn about is the people of the 18th century, the kind of people that do certain sorts of jobs. I got with me Carol Jarboe, who does Maggie, a laundress, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what she knows about laundresses, the kind of people that did that work, the different levels. So tell me about laundresses, washerwomen, all that.
And all the difference.
Yeah.
You have such a different category of people that do the laundry. You have servants in high houses who are paid laundresses that do that kind of work. You have the fine laundresses that do the very hand washables, the ladies' maids. You have the servants who work under another laundress in the household. You have a household that has servants but maybe not a paid laundress, and they'll bring a laundress in, a professional in, to do laundry every so many weeks, and the other servants will help. And then you have the professional laundresses who work on their own. And they are normally the washerwomen is what you hear. And they don't have the best reputation. They're known for being very brawdy, very loud, drunkards, rough on the laundry, difficult to work with, not the most pleasant women to be around. But usually they are from the very lowest class of people. Almost always you see the women that are doing the professional washerwomen of the lower class. They're women whose husbands are idlers, who do not help support the family, or they're drunkards. They perhaps don't have a husband. The husband has left, has abandoned them, has died, something along that line. So you have this group of women that turned to laundry because it was one of the very few things that any woman could do to help survive in the colonies. It was a job that was always out there, and even if you lost everything, you could start taking laundry from people and eke a living out by. Now, you might not have been able to have done a very good laundry. You would be more apt to be down by the river, and you'd be more apt to be doing just the very hard rubbing or the very hard beatings, and you would be very rough on the clothes. But for the poorer classes of people, you could be working for them, and then it wouldn't matter so much. But the documentation we have on those women talk about the fact that so many of them would leave their children behind in whatever hovel they were living in, even the babies, and they would go to work in the mornings like at 4:30 and not be home until after dark, and the children would be there alone all day long by themselves. But again, this was a way they could survive. It was one of the, if you were someone with no education and you were a very rough, kind of low person to begin with, to try to do something outside of that period would be, or in a higher paying job, would be almost impossible. So you've got these street jobs, and then you've got the washerwomen, and you even have some that are just strictly iron manglers, they call them, and they would be doing just the mangling of the clothes. We have documentation of neighbors chipping in and helping a woman who has lost her husband to purchase a mangle so that she could begin to make a living for herself.
So you do need a lot. Would they need a lot of equipment?
Just the washerwomen? No, you would not. You could just work, like I said, if you had a battledore, you had a rock, you had a place at the river that you could go, you could be doing your laundry down there. The bleach that you're using, the chamber lye, of course, is something that you could be collecting on your own. So you could always be bucking or bleaching if you had a container to put it in. So, but just the washing itself, just the going to the water, the running water, and beating, even without soap, beating the dirt out of it and things like that, is something that a woman could get started in without having to have a lot of background behind her. One of the reasons we've had so much trouble building a laundry demonstration, those of us that do it, is because there is very little out there. It's scattered everywhere because nobody goes home and says, today I washed the clothes by doing this. So you just don't have that kind of information because we learned it from our mothers and our mothers from theirs and up the line like that. So it's something that's passed down and handed down. That's one of the reasons we all do it differently. It's because it depends on where you came from, the region, as to what kind of things you're going to learn to do. So,
it sounds like there was a lot of laundry to do in the 18th century.
There was. You can imagine if you don't live in a place big enough to do your own laundry, even if you're a middle class person, if you don't have the place to have a laundry, if you don't have a laundry house or wash house, if you don't have a large area to do that in, then that's not stuff that you're going to keep around. You'd rather hire somebody to come in. And the poorer you are, the more apt you're going to have to give somebody else the laundry to do. Plus you have hospitals to do laundry for. You've got the workhouses that they would bring laundresses in sometimes to do the laundry there for them. So you've got institutions that you can work with, that you could always do that kind of work for. You've got a lot of single men out there that need that kind of work done, you know, that maybe they're not married, or maybe they're traveling. So you could do laundry at the hotels or the inns and taverns. So you've got a wide range of places you could do laundry for. And then you've got the camp followers that follow the army. Usually they were wives of the soldiers, but
that's a
lot of laundry, and that's a whole nother situation. And a difference of what can you do with what you've got, what can you carry. So,
were there instances of, or were there fraudulent things that would happen in laundry?
Not getting paid is one of the things that I've seen the most often, is that someone would bring laundry and the laundress would do it, and then they would not pay them for it. And I've seen several laws, several things that have been written where the laundresses are having to complain, or perhaps if you were to stop bringing in soap because you were embargoing somebody, then here they are with no soap and they don't have any way to do that. So I've seen different situations. The biggest one, though, I think, of the problems is the times they've had to go to court because they've not been paid. And not only is that going to feed them, you know, but that's enough to keep them going for another day to pick up and do it again. But the one thing about the laundress is that it was so difficult on your body. And you see the women that do the washerwoman professionally, the lower income people, break down pretty fast, because it takes a lot of work to do that. It's very hard on you, especially if you're doing it every single day. Yeah,
doing that to just your skin, to your
and
hands.
Your elbows and shoulders from the beating just break them out and rip them apart. So it's very, very harsh, very, very harsh.
So often you've talked about the poor and the lowly. How does that deal? How does this connect with workhouses and what's happening to poor
the pauper
folks?
houses? Yeah, there was a movement toward the end of the 1700s in this country where they were thinking that just providing poor relief for poor people was not really working really well. And they had begun already building almshouses and bringing them in, and they decided, and Philadelphia was the first one to take off with this, that it would be better if they built them a place of industry and gave them something to do. Anyone who was able-bodied enough to do anything, have them do something. And they actually called it a bettering house, because it was going to make you better for society. And they built this bettering house, and the women did laundry, and they also took in mending and mended clothing, and they built gardens all around this institution with fences, of course, that you could see through. And outside in these beautiful gardens, they had little tea tables, and it was a lovely little area, and people would come and have tea and eat sandwiches and watch the paupers do their bettering, you know, be better for that. And they would pay money to do that, and that helped support the pauper house also, like animals in a zoo, is kind of the thought that was behind that. So you see a lot of times in the poorhouses and the almshouses, the workhouses in particular, where they were always trying to come up with something to not only help support the house, but to give the people who were able to do something to do. So you see laundry come into the women's areas a lot in those places.
A lot of folks ask about laundry in the 18th century. It's a fascinating topic. We are here at Martin Station in Western Virginia, and I've got Maggie Delaney. She is doing an entire grand wash. Let's go hear about the entire step-by-step process.
Hello, good day to you, and how are you today? Do you need some laundry done? I've got a big wash set up, the grand wash we call it, and I can do a fine job for you, and I charge a fair price. You don't know how you do it. Well, let me tell you how Maggie does it. Now, before I do, let me tell you it may not be the same as everything you've ever heard, because all of us do it different here in the colonies, no matter where you are. There's some that skip some places, and there's some that do it differently. But this is how Maggie does it, and so you can see the skill of what I do today and see if it's worth your coin. The first thing I'm going to do, you see, is I would start the night before, and I've already taken all the clothing that I have today, and I've done what you would have called a pre-soak. And that means that I'm going to put either in lye or I'm going to put some soap on it, and I'm going to put it over here in my kettle in the hot water. And I'm going to let it sit in this warm water overnight. And hopefully it'll take the stains out. Kettle that I've got, and this is a copper, and it's called the copper because it was always used for laundry. We don't want to do it in iron because it'll take the color of the clothes. It reacts with the soap that I use sometimes. And so I'm going to put it in here, and I'm going to put it in with either a little bag of nice fine ashes so that as it lays in the water, it'll leach out the lye and bleach the clothes. Or if I don't have enough of that, or if I don't want to use that, more commonly, I'm going to use this bleach. You've got bleach like this, right? No? Well, you need to get some of this because it's very fine. This is what we call chamber lye. It's stale urine. We collect it out of the chamber pots you see in the morning and put it outside, and when it sits out for about 2 weeks, it's going to turn into a very strong ammonia, and it does a grand job in here getting the stains out. The more I can do here, the less I have to do down in my tubs. So I'm going to be working really hard to try to get all of the stains, all of the dirt out of it on this side. If it's a shirt or something of a man's, I might take the soap even the night before and put a little bit around the wrists and around the neck, because you know that's where they get the dirtiest, the men do. And let it sit in the warm water overnight before I bring it to a boil the next morning. So here I've been working on these now. They've been in the water overnight, and I brought the water up to a slow boil this morning, and they've been in there now for about, I guess maybe not quite an hour, 45 minutes or so. So once these clothes have done the seeping, I'm going to bring it over here and put it in my first tub, which, as you see, has already got soap whipped up in it. The lye soap is what we're using. Now I know this is what we end up with having to use if we have to buy our soap, if I don't have time to make any. But if I make my own, instead I'll make a soft soap like this. And the difference between the two is something very simple. Salt. You see, you got to have salt to make it bar up like that. And I don't always want salt in my wash. So I do a soft soap like this, and that way I can whisk it up really easy. And it makes it much easier to be able to work into the cloth if I need to do that. And it also makes it easier to work into the fiber, but with my hands. Now, I keep a board here. This is my battle board, or my battle as it's called sometimes. And that's for me to be able to do my work on. And it's also for me to be able to work the soapy water out that I've gotten into there. Now you see, I can squeeze that out just like I'm kneading bread. And I want that soapy water to keep coming through and working its way through, because as that soapy water is inside this piece of cloth, it's going to pick up the dirt that's in there. And when I push it out, the soap and the water will take it out the other side and hopefully clean it. But if it's a thicker piece, or if I have more dirt in it than what I'm comfortable with at this point, then I can also put it up on the board and do a little bit of beating with it. Now this is my battledore. In fact, these are all battledores. These are more from the ladies in England, and that's where I got this one from. And this was more from a lady from the colder countries, the Scandinavian countries. And both of them do the same thing though, and that's to be able to strike the cloth and to drive that soapy water out at a much sharper blow or a much quicker pace to take the bigger dirt and the harder dirt out that way. Now, since I'm doing a shirt, I still have buttons on the sleeves and upon the neck, so I need to be very, very careful. So I'm going to keep it curled like this with those buttons curled underneath, and I'll take my lighter battledore and do it along that way so that I don't break the buttons. You can see the difference in how fast the water comes out by the sharp strikes that I could do. Now one thing I'm not going to do is take this and rub it on this board, because this is linen and it will tear if I rub it on a rough board like this. So I have to be very, very careful. The washing I'm going to do is all going to be in the soaking and in the rubbing, little bit of rubbing that I do, and even that I have to be gentle, and for the pushing the water out like this. I'm going to put a lot more stock in trying to get the dirt out before I get to this point though. If nothing else, I get tired of the beating all day, you know. Now that I've done all the washing that I can do, there's one more thing that I need to do before I can put everything away and put it out and get it drying. And that's I'm going to need to rinse it just a bit. And then if it's a white thing, if it's something that I'm really trying to make nice, particularly a man's shirt or a lady's cap or a cloth that she wears about her neck, I'm going to bring it to this pan next. And in here, there's going to be two things. One of them is going to be a little bit of blue coloring, and the other, a little bit of starch. Because I'm going to be doing my ironing tomorrow, and I want to make sure that they dry as white and clean as they can be, and as stiff as they can be, to make it easier for the run the iron over, you see. Now, right now, up until, just not very long ago, the only way that we could get bluing was like this. This is called smalt. And this is actually ground up cobalt blue glass, ground very, very finely. And this is how you would scatter in the water in order to make things look a little bit whiter. By the time we get to the time where we are right now, they've learned how to take indigo and do the same thing with it. But there's a big difference between the two. The better is the smalt, because the indigo is a dye. And so when you put it on your white things, it actually is going to put a blue dye on it. It takes it a little longer to come out, where the smalt is not a dye, and it will not do that to your clothes. It's a little easier to control. Now, the starch that we're using right now mainly is made from wheat bran, and that takes a long process, and we get it here in the colonies in little bricks about that big, and it comes from Poland, the very best does, you see, and that already has the blue smalt mixed in it. So you can just take the little brick and shave it into the warm water here, and you have both the bluing and the starch at the same time. But if I don't have any of the wheat bran, or I don't have any of the Polish starch to be able to use, then I can use also potatoes. I can ground them up into water and let them seep, and then take the chunks out and use that for a good medium-sized starch. I have to make sure and thin it down enough that it doesn't clot into the clothes, you know. We don't want chunks of potatoes in our clothes as we wear it. I can also use rice, and some of the gentlemen like that better, especially the military men, because the rice water, when it is ironed, the rice starch makes things very shiny, and they like things to stand out that way. So I might save that if I have some, in order to be able to do that. And again, I'm using just the water, the rice water. Now, if I have a lady's thing that's very fine, and I don't want anything quite that heavy in the starching, I can always use this. This is called isinglass. This comes from the air bladders of the sturgeon fish in the big rivers. And I can put this in hot water and melt it down, and it makes a very thin type of starch, like a sizing. The ladies of the kitchen are using this also to thicken puddings and gravies, so I have to fight them for it, you know. This will cost me a little bit. If I want something thick though, and I have nothing else that I can turn to, I can always go to the stables. I've got a friend that's a stable boy, and he saves me these. These are the horse's hoof trimmings that they've trimmed off. And I can wash them really well, and when I need a little extra heavy starch, I can put these in water and boil them down, and they make a really thick type of sticky kind of starch, because they are gelatin. And they'll do a really fine job, particularly on lace, because it will stiffen them very, very hard, as long as I tack the lace down and let it dry that way. So that's what I'll be able to use. But if I can get the Poland starch, that's the one that's done the most. So I'm going to take my white thing once it's clean and rinsed and put it through this water, and then I'm going to take it out here. Come on, I'll show you. Now that I have everything washed as much as I can do, it's time for something else to happen, and that's the drying and also some more bleaching. Now my dark things I don't care to bleach out. I just need them dry, and so I put them up on a line. We have lines that have been here since about 1600. They first were made of horsehair braided together, but now we have linen ones and even hemp ones. And I'm going to hang my darks up right here and let the air take care of them before I take them down and move them on into the ironing. But the whites, they go someplace else. Well, now there we are. And I know you're asking yourself, now Maggie, after you've done all that work, Why would you put your white things down on that green grass just to get them dirty all over again? But there's a reason, you see. Because what have I done but to try to make the white things white, correct? Well, that's what I'm doing here also. You see, I'm putting them out here on the green grass, not only for the sun to dry them, but for it also to bleach it. But not only is the sun bleaching it, but the grass itself is going to be bleaching it from the bottom. You see, the grass is breathing out a little bit of something that we breathe in. And when it does that, it's going to bleach out these clothes from the bottom up. Just a wee bit, but it helps the sun. And between the two of them and the wetness, it'll help them get whiter and whiter. And the longer that I leave them out here, the better off they'll be. In fact, if they're not white enough, I can actually take them in tonight and wet them again in the morning and throw them out one more time. And that, as many days as I can leave them, will do that. And if I'm going to do that, then I may wait and do my starching and bluing afterwards.
Right now, I want to know about the evolution of the washing machine. What do we have here that turns into our modern day washing machine? Tell me about it.
All righty, I will. All right. Well, you know that we're going to be using a tub here to do the laundry in. Back in the 1500s, this was called bucking. They didn't call it washing. And so they had alternate ways of doing things. In the bucking was usually a way that you would move the water around. You didn't always have to beat it like these people did, or like I showed you in the other video. So here are some other tools that came out that moved through the 17 and into the 1800s. The one that is probably the oldest is this one, and it's called a pauser, or a paunch as they called it, and it was to work up and down in the tub with the laundry already in there. And as you push it up and down, it moves the laundry and it moves the water in the soap.
So you're pressing down.
So you're
onto
pushing,
the,
yeah.
Right?
They think maybe that's the paunch or the pauser actually meant a log of wood. So it must have started out maybe just as a regular
simple,
stick, yeah. But again, to move it around or to stir it around and to make that water move around and work through the laundry itself.
But this isn't a very complicated piece of machinery.
It isn't, and you'll notice as we were stamping backwards that it splashes everywhere. So it's not really very helpful. So as it moves along, and we get into the latter part of the 1700s, early 1800s, you begin to see it change. And this is an old form of it that came from, probably this is from about the middle of the 1800s. So but you see what they've done at the bottom here.
Yeah, they smashed it down.
Yeah, they smashed, that's where it's been hitting the bottom of the tub.
Over years, yeah.
But they've cut out the sides and cut into the middle so that now when you push it up and down, the water is squirting out the sides. And now it is, you can see that it's beginning to rotate. Well, it's going to morph a little bit further, and eventually it's going to come to something that looks like that.
Right, like a plunger with holes in it.
Like a plunger with holes in it. And this is called a hand agitator. It's still used today.
Oh, that moves
and now
the
you can
water
really
much better,
see how it moves the water around. This is the great-great-grandfather of your plunger, if you're wondering, gentlemen, where it came from.
Right. So, and then there's another step too?
Well, there's another tool.
Okay.
From these, and the ideal of these,
it's a milking stool,
after 1750, it's a milk stool with a stick on it. That's right. This is called a washing dolly, or a dolly maid, or a dolly peg. It had a lot of different names. A lot of times it was just called the dolly. But it does look like a milking stool with legs on the bottom. But where the pauser went up and down, and this can do that also, this one also can go back and forth.
Right.
And those legs will grab the laundry that's in there and move it back and forth in the water. So here you have the birth of your agitator that you see in the modern laundry machines like that. We know that this came over here sometime around 1800, a little after, because there is a obituary from Colonial Williamsburg from, I believe, 1831, where there's a gentleman who's been struck by lightning, and it says that he did the dolling for the laundresses. I hope he wasn't doing it at the moment he got struck.
That's a lot of work.
A lot of work up here. This would be something that you could see a man doing to help the laundresses out.
I mean, how long can you do that before you'd wear out?
Oh, and when you put clothing in there and the legs are grabbing the clothes, it's very, very difficult to do. As we approach the Civil War, you're going to begin to see ads for galvanized tubs that they look like big kegs that sit on the ground, and they come with a dolly, and they're called dolly kegs. And you would put your laundry down in there and drop this down, and there you have it. And that's much, much easier than trying to do it up a little higher like this, you know. Of course, not everybody put their tubs up on stands like I do. Some of them had it on the ground like that. So that was another option.
So when I think laundry machine, I think old-fashioned. I say, where's the washboard?
Yeah,
okay?
That's a question that we get quite a bit, is why is there not a washboard? And the truth of it is we can find no record of any type of a scrubbing board. In fact, the first time that we actually see it in the patents is in 1833. So we know it came over here through that period of time, through the early 1800s, but we're not exactly sure when. We do know that at Mount Vernon, they have none of it in their records. Monticello has no records of it. So if it came, it just came in a little at a time. We think it came from the Scandinavian countries, so it may have come in just a person at a time here and there. But
so we've got a board, but it's flat and
backboard, but
smooth.
it's flat, yeah. And in fact, this is even only rarely used. I use this in order to be able to use my beating on, but I would use as much a block of wood or perhaps even a rock, depending on where I was to do that. So we're not scrubbing on anything right now.
No washboards.
No washboards. Now, the beetles that came from the northern part of England did have some ridges on the top of them, but they were longer like this and were ridged all the way down so that they look somewhat like what we think a washboard is, except for they're very skinny. But they were actually used to press out the water out of the clothes. They were not used to scrub on. Linen, if you scrub it up and down on rough teeth like this, you're going to tear it up. As I said before, not everybody did this type of thing with their laundry anyways. You've got the Scottish women that were known for the fact that their tubs are on the ground and they stomp it with their feet. They put the soap and the urine all in one tub and stomp it around like that. I've heard that the Irish women also, but they're not well known as the French women for doing that. So it's all a matter of agitation, and that's something that sets the groundwork and involves into our
If you look at
machine.
modern washing machines,
Exactly.
they work exactly like that. They make the water do this, they do that to it. So it's all exactly the same process. They're just doing it with a big machine instead of
that.
handwork.
And something interesting, you would think that washing machines were a fairly new ideal, but they actually started being advertised over in the England area about 1750. So we've had washing machines that long. And one of the advertisements in 1790 actually has an extended dolly that's in the lid. And so you would put all of your soapy water and stuff and lock it down, and then it had a handle at the top that you did back and forth like that. And they talked about how much faster that was and how much more proficient than having a washerwoman do the laundry that way. So so here you have the birth of the washing machine in more ways than one.
One of the great things about 18th century laundry is it's a lot more complex, not only in its mechanics, but in the chemistry, right?
Indeed.
So tell me about these amazing chemicals that are being used in the 18th century laundry.
Laundry program, I will. The first thing and the thing that most people are familiar with is the soap.
Right.
Of course, we're using lye soap. In our period of time, we're using that mainly made from ashes from the fire with water run through it that leaches out the lye, and then mixing the lye water with grease. We prefer tallow, which would have come from beef or deer, but you can use lard for that, and we'll render the fat and then take the water from the ashes and put it together, and after cooking it for a number of hours, you get this kind of a situation. Now here on the frontier, our soap is soft like this. It's going to be very goopy along the line, like mashed potatoes. Actually, that has a little bit of water in it, but it's still very soft. It will not form to a bar. And people are more familiar with the bar soap, but the difference between the two is that you've got to have salt in order to make it bar up like this. And at least on the frontier, we don't have that. Now back in the colonies, you're getting bar soap, cake soap. It's being brought in from France with perfume in it. It's being made. But if I was making it just out here to do my laundry, I would prefer to have the soft soap. And the difference between the two is this is from the lye, you're getting nothing but potassium hydroxide. And today's soap makers, the lye that they're using already has that sodium in it, and it's sodium hydroxide, so it makes a bar instead. But the stain removers, you know, what do you do? As much as I can do ahead of time is what I want to do, so that I have less working and rubbing and beating and all that. So we have a number of different recipes that we have found in not only the servant directories that had little laundry information in the back, but also in the cookbooks in the back. How to get stains out of linen, how to get paint out of linen. And they have a number of different things. Milk is one of the things they use. They use bran a great deal. But here are some that I have here that are particular that I could use. One of the things that we can use is pearl ash, and that is a very cooked down lye, so it's a very pure, very strong
potassium carbonate.
That's right. To do
you
that,
use that in baking. You use it apparently in laundry too.
Exactly, in laundry too. We use also here in the laundry. You see it more potash, which is the lye breakdown or the ash breakdown. We use alum, which again you're going to be using in the baking,
right.
And that is also a stain remover. In fact, you'll see a lot of the cooking things cross over, like the isinglass that we talked about earlier. Right. You've got borax, which is a little harder to come by, but it is here. Soda, washing soda, is also here at that time.
Sodium carbonate.
Indeed. You've got vinegar, and that's something that's going to be used quite a bit for a number of different kinds of stains, particularly things that are like green or grass or berries, that type of thing. You're going to see vinegar being used for that. And of course lemon juice, if I can get it. Lemon juice was used to take out berry stains in particular. But now what do I do? That's all fine and good, but when I get to the colored clothes, I can't use my bleaching, and I have to be careful about what stain removers. It will change the color. So what we preferred at that period of time was ox gall, and that is actually the bile from the gall bladder of an ox. Now, the book that I got this from said you could use he-goat too, but it wasn't quite as good. So I guess it was a particular thing. But ox gall not only got stains out of colored clothes, but it supposedly brightened the colors of these natural dyes that they were using at this period of time without harming them at all. So it worked very much like your Clorox 2 does today. Then what about wool? That wool I'm not going to put in my boiling water over there. I boil it right away. So we have to find something that will take
stains. I've got a big grease spot. What do I do?
What are we going to do about that? Well, the wool men that make the wool are called fullers, and they found a particular type of clay dirt that is very good at making a paste and putting in that grease spot, and it will actually draw the stains out of wool and dry, and you brush it off. So it's very much like an early dry cleaning. Right.
And in fact, wools you don't wash necessarily.
You don't wash like
you
that.
Brush
Not like
them
that.
Clean. You use different things like that. You brush it clean. And
exactly. And you certainly don't rub it around because in the water, because you'll full it out even thicker, and you don't want to do that. Pipe clay dust, taking an old clay pipe and grinding it down, works somewhat the same way, but it's not quite as good as the fuller's oars. This is known today by another name, and people put it in their flower beds.
Diatomaceous earth.
That's right. So those are all things, those are just a few of the things that I can use to try to get stains out before we actually get started. But bleaching, whites are the things that you're going to really be working the hardest at.
That's the main thing.
The main linens are going to be white. Your tablecloths, your bedspreads, all of those things are going to be heavy linen. So it's trying to get them white is what we're going to be shooting for. And as a washerwoman, that's going to be my main job. So I have the bleaching that I do what stain removing I need to. I put them in the boiling pot. I can bleach them with ashes from the fire.
We got ashes here.
We got ashes right here. I can bleach them with the stale urine that we call chamber lye. It also is called lant or wheaten. The reason it's called chamber lye is because you wanted to get it out of the chamber pot first thing every morning. The rest of the day, it's too watery.
Oh, okay.
So the night urine
you
is when
you
want the concentrated urine. And you would take that and put it somewhere in a kettle outside so that it's exposed to the air. And when you expose urine to the air for the oxygen for a couple of weeks, it turns into ammonia, very strong ammonia.
Right.
So that's the bleaching power that we're going to be using with that, the stain remover. And it does a very good job.
So we can use ashes. We can use urine. There's a third way to do bleach, right? What is it?
There is. Once you get done with all the washing and you have your whites, to lay them out on green anything, preferably grass, and lay them in the sun like that is going to be a very strong bleaching. Not only is the sun doing the bleaching coming down from the top, but the grass itself, because of the oxidation that is going through, the photosynthesis, is actually going to be pushing up some of that oxygen through our clothes and whitening them a little from the bottom.
Both directions.
Both directions from that.
How long would things stay out whitening?
Well, just for us, if I was just doing the laundry for you today, then I might not leave it out more than just the day. Okay. But in the colonies, there were people that were called whitesters, and their job was to whiten linen. and you would give your white linen, your white clothing to them, your heavy linens, about every couple of months or so, and they would keep them for 3 or 4 days.
Okay.
And then bring them back bright and white. And they would use a lot of the process that I'm showing you here, but they would leave them out into the sun on the green for a much longer period of time.
So if it's not sun shining outside and we still want to get our whites white, what's the process here?
Well, this is called bucking, and this was something that could have been done at the beginning of the wash as opposed to the boiling, or it's something that could be done even on the indoors on a bad day. It looks like it might rain, and we might not be able to do the laundry as we would like to have it done. So we would take a tub, one of our wooden tubs like this, that was usually called a buck tub, and we put a heavy linen cloth across it called a bucking cloth, and then we would put about 2 inches worth of ashes on top of old ash. And we would set this up close to our fireplace and hang our kettle inside, and then heat water in there till it was almost boiling. And then take a nice big mug and dip it in that hot water and pour it across these ashes. And as the water goes through the ashes and through the cloth into the clothing that's underneath, which we would put only whites in there now, and you'd put your heavier stuff at the bottom and your lighter stuff at the top. But as it goes through that, it's going to leach out the lye that's in the ashes. And that water, lye water, will drip through. And we would keep doing that with that hot water until the tub was full. And then we would let it sit until it cooled, pull the bung out and let the water run out and reheat it and do it again. And we would continue to do this for anywhere from 12 to maybe even 24 hours overnight. And that way, when we got done, we would have very, very white bleached clothes as we brought them out. And we could actually just rinse them even with a little soap or without at that period of time, and they would be ready to wear.
And it also sends that bleaching compound down into a diluted water bath so it doesn't splotch it or do strange things. Right. So a very slow and kind of a gentle way to do it.
Very gentle.
Because it's not being agitated.
We don't want to over lye them. We don't want to continue with the lye bath. And you also have to use clean water occasionally because the water that goes down in there with it's going to get dirty. So you want to change that out.
Keep washing it through.
But it is a constant process that could be done, but it was a very good way to bleach or seep or buck, as they say, the clothes.
One of the most fascinating parts of making things white is the bluing. Explain the bluing real quick for us.
And why it works. Because we all know that if you put blue on white, it makes it blue.
Yeah,
right?
you would think.
So why does this make things whiter? Well, it has to do with our eyes and the way we see color. You see, white is not a color, but it wants to be a color so bad. Even though it's the absence of all colors, it would really like to be a color. And the favorite color it tends to want to be is yellow. So as your whites get older, they begin to go sometimes grayish, but a lot more times yellowish. So how do you bring them back out of that yellow to make them white again? Well, the only way you can do that is to go from the one end of the spectrum where the yellow is to the opposite end of that spectrum where this bright blue is. And taking that bright blue and putting that over that yellowish white, where your eyes then begin to see the blue hue instead, makes your eyes think that it has come back to being white again.
So how do we blue things in the 18th century?
In the 18th century, like I said in the first video, you have, first of all, it's done with smalt is the oldest thing, which is a ground up blue cobalt glass. And it's ground very, very fine into a very fine powder like that. And it was usually mixed with the starch. And you could, as you took the little brick of starch that you would get from Poland, which was the best place to get starch, you would shave it off, and it would put enough bluing in the water to be able to do both your starching and your bluing at the same time. By the time we get, though, to the Revolution, we've begun to get other bluings. We have a Prussian blue that has come out. We have a fig blue. We have a thumb blue. We have other blues that are coming along. In fact, in the records of Mount Vernon, where George Washington was, we can see where he ordered different kinds of bluing for his laundresses to do. And one of the new ways is the indigo bluing. In fact, they would take indigo sometimes and mix it with starch and make little chunks about a nut size, and they called that thumb blue. So you have different kinds of bluings, and you actually have a new bluing that's being made in England that's called an aquamarine. That was the one that they liked the best. And there was a company named Ricketts that began to make that, and they still make it today. So you can buy a Rickett bluing at that time. But that's going to coat that yellow white. It's going to make your eyes think that things have gotten whiter because it pulls it back to the other end of that spectrum. So it's a fuller thing. Really, it doesn't make it white, just makes our eyes think that.